Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Stahls Welcome to part 2 of our Stahls cutter series. My name is Mark Schwarb, and with me is Mike Koval. We're going to present both the Roland and the GraphTech cutters to you today. We're going to go through the features and benefits, some of the accessories. We're going to do a little cutting. We're also going to present a couple of the software programs very briefly to show you how we get to the cutting portion of the webinar. As usual, we like to hear where people are from, so we have a chat operating, and if you want to chime in, and we have Stacy Wilson behind the scenes, kind of sort of running the operation. She can maybe comment where people are coming in from. But we're excited to do this. We know that our predecessors, Kelly and Jenna, did a great webinar showing off the more crafter and hobbyist level cutters. The Roland GS24 behind me, and the GraphTech CE7000 behind Mike. I consider more light industrial cutters. They're both of the 24-inch variety, both with rolled fed functions. So a step up in the cutter productivity area of your business. So once again, my name is Mark Schwarb. I'm down in Daytona Beach, Florida area. I come to you with nearly 32 years experience in the garment decorating industry as part of a family sporting goods business that we owned and operated down in the Fort Lauderdale area of Pompano Beach. I believe it was in 1995, 96 that we purchased our first cutter from Roland. It was the original Cam 1 servo that, not coincidentally, Stahls put out as part of their introduction to cut materials that were coming on a roll at the time. For many years, we had to hand place individual letters on jerseys and numbers on uniforms for the kids that were coming through our business. And the writing was on the wall that a cutter was going to be an essential piece of equipment to get us to the next level, to speed our production, to offer more fonts and sizes and arches, and just everything just stepped up so much when we were able to purchase rolls and run it through a roll and cutter, very, very similar to the one I'll be demonstrating later. I'm a sales rep, an outside sales rep for the company. I represent Stahls, Transfer Express, Hotronics Presses, Great Dane Graphics, through the group Stahl entities, and I couldn't be more happy to be here to present all of our quality products that you can run through a cutter today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike for his intro. We want to hear a little bit about you, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. Like Mark said, my name is Mike Koval. I've been here at Stahls I've been in the industry for going on about 17 years now. It's been one of the best things that I've been doing in my life. So I've had the opportunity to work with the Roland cutter that Mark will be showing you, the GraphTech CE7000, which is relatively new to the industry, upgrade from their previous version. So definitely look forward to it and showing you the benefits of cutting. And as Mark mentioned, just step up from the craft cutters. As you start to grow that business, these cutters are going to help you streamline and put things out much more quickly and efficiently. While the craft cutters do a great job in doing what they do, when it comes time to production and higher volume orders, these will be your best friend due to the speed and the much easier production features that these vinyl cutters have. So definitely look forward to talking with you all and hearing questions and feedback from you during the presentation here today.
Okay. We do have a little bit of a schedule and a process to go through here. First, we're going to introduce the machines, some of the features right on the machines. As we're doing that, I think that would be a good time. If a question comes up, you can chat that into Stacy. We'll pause after we've introduced our respective machines, answer those questions as they come in. If you can mention which machine you're asking about, that would be good. Either the GS24 or just put the 7000 if you want to know, the maximum forces and things like that. But here I'll just turn a little bit and give you maybe a more full view of the Roland. Mike, can you just nod your head if you're seeing everything? Got me good? Okay, there we go. Now I've got a full screen view of myself and the machine. When I'm out on the road and I'm doing trade shows or working with customers in their own facilities, I kind of do my preview of the cutters from the head to the toe. Here, like I mentioned before, the 24-inch cutting width, so you can run 24-inch wide material, which is very popular from Stahls. 20 for materials that are going to go on apparel, 15 for apparel, and 12. Those are your three most common widths. 24-inch can occupy the full area, and that would be more in the sign vinyl. If you're going to cut decals and stickers for your customers, you're going to maybe utilize all 24 inches of this area. Working down from the general width, you can't see it, but right here is the release for holding the pressure rollers, which are what advance the materials through a roll-fed cutter like this. We've got the printer carriage. We've got the cutter blade in its blade holder in here. The blade does show itself out the bottom of some people may call it a micrometer, but you can adjust the height or the exposure, I should say, maybe, of your blade with a simple turn of this. Again, micrometer, it's an old term. But that's your blade holder and your blade carriage. Obviously, this moves across. The material moves forward, backwards, creating our XY axis. You may notice these white dash marks across this area because just below that is a polished stainless steel roller. And in the areas directly below those white stripes is the roughened or knurled portion of the steel. That's what's going to grip your material and push it in and out, retracting it, pushing it out as you need to, as you're cutting. Pinch rollers are what apply pressure down on the material for that advancement, and they slide back and forth and line up with where your material is. My first batch of material just fell out the back of the machine, so let me just put this in so you can get a visual. Sorry for you having to look at my backside. So as I insert this, I'm able to slide and move the pinch rollers in over the material, optimizing the width in the cutting area, and then throwing down the handle to pinch it. Okay, it's not going anywhere now until I want it to. So you saw the adjustment of the pinch rollers. They are now lined up over the roughened area of that stainless steel roller that I mentioned. Directly below the material is what you would call the cutting strip. It's a protective area for if you were to penetrate through material. It's there to absorb and not just to completely destroy a blade. The cutting strip is an important piece to keep your eye out for gouging. Over time, you will create a groove or a crevice there, and that can be a problem for your quality of your cuts. So cutting strips and blades are your two primary consumable pieces in any cutter. Occasionally, if you're in an environment like a screen print operation where you've got a lot of the aerosol adhesives in the air floating around, you can get some gumming inside your blade holder and have to replace those from time to time. That's a rarity. Your blades and your cutting strip will certainly be more normally needing to be replaced. As we come down from there, underneath the material here, I've got an optical eye. There's a matching one in the back that's reading that there is material loaded in the machine. It's sending up a beam that finds that it's covered, and it tells the machine, yes, I am loaded with material and I'm safe to cut. These little striations or guidelines here are to show you whether your material is tracking nice and straight, and tracking is important. It's a function of the rollers and the machine and all working in unison, bringing your material out nice and straight. So it's up to you as the human to load your material in there as square and as straight as possible. Then the rollers will bring your material out nice and straight. If your tracking is off as the material advances, you'll notice that it's moving away from these various guides here, and you'd have to stop, retract the material, and correct for that. As you work down a little bit further, this groove is nicely put here so that you can trim off material with a blade. All right, keeping a nice straight front edge of your material and keeping you from going up inside here and cutting and scratching up the plastic chassis of your machine. On the Roland, a little different from the GraphTech, and I think we'll go into this a little bit further in a moment. On the Roland, we've got more of a touch screen or a push button functionality for your adjustments, your carriage movements, your force, your speed, your offset, and some other packed away crop mark readings, things like that, your overcut are all presented to you on the Roland via the screen here. And you've got then the choices for scrolling through them, selecting them, making changes. If you want to adjust the force up and down, you use a push button to find force. You change it up and down with the up and down arrows, and then you hit enter to save that change that you've made. So generally speaking, what you can't see is there's a tray behind this, and that is so that I can land a roll of the material on it. And so it will continuously feed. And that's a big difference between the cutters you're going to see today and the ones that were presented a week ago. These are not cartridges. These are not trays. These are roll-fed cutters. So as wide as my material is and as long as my roll is how long I can start to make some graphics. I've done signage up to about 18 feet. So if I'm getting good tracking, I was able to cut a very long word with it just coming out the front with never stopping. 18 feet worth of words and sticker vinyl for a highway monument sign. So roll fed. Currently, I've got this on the table. It's pretty obvious to see. Both these cutters that we're going to talk about today come with a stand included. All right, so there is a rolling stand. You can move it around your work area, get it out of the way, put it in the closet if you know you're not going to use it. Move it around so long as it stays within connection distance from your computer. All right, part of my demonstration now will be to get into some graphics. We want to create something, and then we do want to cut it for you. So I've chosen to do my graphics through our CAD Works Live. This is a free online art center that Stahls has created and has decided for years to provide free of charge to its customers. So with that, I'm going to click into share screen. I'm going to get you over to, I want to point out in CabWorks Live, an education section. We have video training here, and within video training, there's, I believe, 25 or maybe a few more that are set there for you to learn. We're not here to do a complete session on CabWorks Live. Just know that these video tutorials exist, page after page of them, covering every subject imaginable on how to operate and get the most out of CabWorks Live is in here just for you. So education is captured right here within CabWorks Live. Support, should you have dramatic problems, you can submit a ticket and get a call, or at least a chat or communications on something that's really stressing you, maybe connectivity, things like that. But your education area is priceless. The design area is where I'm going to need to go now because I want to utilize our Easy Teams section. Design Studio, I believe Mike's going to work a little bit in that. I'm going to choose the Easy Teams area. That's my history, making uniforms for folks. So within Easy Teams, I've got the ability to create player names, which is what so many people buy from Stahls until they reach the point of saying, I need a cutter of my own. And once they purchase a cutter, they say to themselves, well, what's the fastest and easiest way to do a roster full of players? And it's right here, CabWorks Live, Easy Teams, and then within the player names, the player numbers, or the combos is where you can create those transfers, those panels, whatever you like to call them, to be placing on your sports uniforms or booster shirts or whatever it is that you need to decorate. So within this, I want to just quickly click on player names. I'm going to go ahead and type in some names of varying different lengths. With that, I've built a list. If these were going to have numbers, I would simply be typing the name, a comma, and then the jersey number that's going to go with it. I would also be in the combos area rather than just player names. So I've built a list. I've got my graphic of what one of them will look like, except that's not the font that I necessarily want to utilize here. I want to go ahead and pick some other fonts. Within CabWorks Live, you've got hundreds upon hundreds of font styles. You've got clip art and things like that that you can use when you're over in the regular art designer, not in the Easy Teams. But you've got page after page, as you can see over here, 58 pages of fonts, and most of those pages are very filled. So well over hundreds, of fonts to choose from. I want something fairly simple and fast to get to cut today. I don't need to be too elaborate, just that this exists and it's here for your use. Okay, so I've got a font that's kind of nice. I'm not real happy with that spacing, so I do have a choice here to put a little bit more space between each of those items or each of those letters. And I get to see a rendering here in this little thumbnail before I go ahead and put it on the screen. I'm going to make it 2 inches. That's pretty common in the sports world. If this was a junior league team, a ladies team, even a men's team. So 2 inches, not unusual. I'm good with that. And that'll apply now to all 3 of the names that I have checked over here. So I've got Ferrero, Wilson, and Thomas pretty well ready to cut. This is a cuttable design. I just want to let you know that there is the option of putting this on an arch. You can apply some, you could change the size. You can, alter, you can limit how wide it's going to be. Suppose this was a jersey that had a stripe going across the shoulder, and I had to make the names very narrow to fit within a confined area. I could choose what size to limit all the names to. On this one, I'm okay with 12 inches. And I'm ready to cut. Well, I'm ready to send it to our vector cut. Vector cut is a driver. You'll hear that word a lot. Both these cutters, the Graphic and the Roland, come with driver programs. We're not utilizing them. They're included in the box. It's part of what Roland and GraphTech provide. I think Mike's got to run a little bit of it with his GraphTech, but for the most part, it's there so that people can say it's all included in the box, and that's fine. Those are powerful programs. I just happen to think CAD Works offers more. Most of you have access to Illustrator, Corel, and others, so you have the option to use those as well. You'll have Cut Studio if you choose to purchase a Roland at your disposal, and it works perfectly well.
Hey, Mark, we have some great questions coming in. Do you mind answering those while you go through this name?
Sure, let's give it a try. Mm-hmm.
We have a couple people wondering, can you adjust the tracking between individual letters to bring the letters closer together? Because they were wondering why there's so much space between the A and the R. Is that something you can individually change in this program?
I don't think I can do it here in Easy Teams. I can do it in the regular designer on the other side, because that is common, and I'm glad you brought that up. I almost wonder if you know me, because that is one of my pet peeves. When there's a V and an A next to each other, a W and an A, letters like that, you get an inordinate amount of space because of the shape of the letters, and it is nice to close that up. In Easy Teams, I don't have that. In the designer, I do. I can break the word apart by regions, click on the A, click the left button, and bump it closer to a letter like a V, or in this case, maybe slightly closer to the R on the left. So it's in here. It's just not that I know of in Easy Teams.
Okay, good to know. And then Miko had a question. They were wondering, after you cut the vinyl and have it applied to your fabric, how do you get that design to your embroidery platform to install a satin stitch over the edges?
That would be a function of most likely of your embroidery software. I think most modern embroidery machines can take a vector file and apply stitches to it. So when this gets to cutting stage, it's a line. It's not a black filled in letter. It's a vector file. It's a line going around the outside of it, and you can export that perhaps into your I think Wilcom, Pulse, and a few are still the current software packages that come with most embroidery machines. And then you could tell it to put a zigzag, a satin. You can correct the density and the stitch lengths and things like that in your software that comes with your embroidery machine. We do sell a prepackaged program called Twill Stitch Pro, and that would be another way If your embroidery machine doesn't have that functionality, take a look at our Stahls Twill Stitch Pro.
And Mark, when you were in the output section of the Easy Team sending to Vector Cut, there's also another feature in there where you would be able to export the selected items, whether you selected all 10 names or whatever, to an PLT file, which then you should be able to bring into Corel, Illustrator, or those embroidery softwares for that stitch file generation too.
Okay. If Corel Illustrator had that functionality, that's great. I mean, getting
running from CAD Works, you're able to export as a PLT file. So
correct.
You don't have indirect, yes.
Correct. Okay. All right, Stacy, any others?
They were wondering what format you were exporting this in. I think I missed that.
So again, I think it's the format that Mike just mentioned, PLT or PLTX in this case.
Okay.
PLT primarily for plotter. That's the common terminology for these cutters, is it's a plotter. This software is generated for a plotter, and then the X, I believe, Stahls tossed in to denote CAD Works, because we spell works with an X.
That's exactly it.
Okay. One thing any other, Stacy? Sorry, don't want to run away from that. But.
No, you're fine. If you want to keep going with the demo, I can read through, make sure we didn't miss any more, and then I can read them in a bit.
Okay. So last thing I did here is that, so the job has been imported into our Vector Cut, which is the driver that's going to do the mathematical calculations on how the cutter is going to receive the information. It's going to tell the cutter, how to run the motors and that sort of thing. I think one important thing to mention on the motors, both of these cutters are servo motor, not stepper motor. So they run very smoothly. They run a good bit quicker, and they run with more force than the part one of this series, where the two cutters were stepper motors. Stepper motors receive their energy, their electric pulses. I'm not going to say, maybe sporadically, but you'll hear a click, 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 click as you're doing your cutting. And that's a servo motor kind of going up and down, up and down, up and down, releasing and moving. The servo motor cutters, like these two, are much smoother. The electricity going to the motors and the pulleys and everything else is seamless, and they're much faster. So key denoter between these cutters and the part one chapter of this series, the stepper motor cutters. All right, so now I've got this design sent into this driver we call Vector Cut. It's a free download. What I need to do, because I'm cutting apparel vinyl, I need to mirror these. I think if you have a cutter, this is a function of something you've got to do, because with heat transfer vinyl, making the transfers for apparel, we're cutting through the back side of the material. So I'm going to go ahead and mirror that. You can see it did it on the bottom of the screen there. Since my material fell out at the beginning of this, I'm just going to reposition and make sure I'm good to go with the cutting. And after I hit cut, I'll go ahead and get off of this screen and hopefully show you all the cutting underway. All right, so I've got my design, just doing a quick little checklist. It's in the right position on the material. My material piece is large enough to cut the design that I'm getting ready to send. There's some other things in here. This is not a CabWorks live webinar, but I love to have auto weed on. After it cuts these three names, it's going to very quickly put a box around them. That's nice when this page is filled with a dozen or so designs. Each logo can have a box put around it, so when you're weeding, it's easy to find where on the page your logo is. So auto weed is nice to have. Quantity, I can go ahead and tell the machine how many I would want, and it'll fill the page for me. So if I wanted 100 of these, or even if I just wanted 2, maybe this team is buying 2 sets of jerseys, and if both sets are white or light colored and they wanted 2 sets in black, I could run them both at the same time, just stacking them up. I could have Thomas Wilson and Ferrero put right here very quickly by going to quantity. Origin is where the cutting is going to begin, which portion or what side of the leading edge of the material the cutting is going to begin. and I can adjust that, but it's already set for me. Up here under cutter, I'm going to go ahead and point this out because CabWorks Live is available to use on the Silhouette Cameo. I've got quite a few cutters installed here, and one of them is the Silhouette Cameo, but I'm utilizing the current Roland selection. So there's a lot going on in here. This is a powerful free tool for you to use by just being a Stahls customer. All right, let me go ahead and come on out of there. So we're underway with the cutting. At this point, while it's cutting and while I'm doing some weeding, I'm going to toss over to Mike. He's going to take you through some things regarding the GraphTech so we can make this even and balanced for you all.
Well done, Mark. Thanks for handing it over. I'm Mike Koval, everybody. And what I'm going to be covering to is very similar to how Mark did his thing, just going over some features and some differences here between the cutters. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these two machines are going to do the same exact thing. They're going to quickly and easily cut your heat transfer vinyl, for all of your apparel decorating needs. But in addition, decals and stickers and things like that. So both of these machines do have that flexibility to cover a number of different applications, whether it be heat transfer or non-apparel signage, stuff like that. And so, as Mark mentioned, this is a servo cutter as well as the Roland. And so the connectivity here on these machines, they're both USB driven. A couple of other advancements that the CE7000 has is you are also able to connect the CE7000 via Ethernet capability. And that'll just give a little more speed as far as sending the information back and forth to the cutters, and that you'd be able to network that to have multiple computers access it at the same time. And I think with the CE7000, you could also load a USB drive with preloaded designs, which you could load in there and cut directly from the machine. And so what a lot of folks will utilize that for, I know this day and age where we are in the current climate as a nation, a lot of the tournaments and events and on-site gatherings no longer happen, but in this industry with tournaments and events, a lot of people take these things on the road, the vinyl cutters and their heat presses, and having that thumbstick will reduce you having to have a computer in there if you're offering stock designs and you're cutting on demand. So a lot of connectivity features here with the CE6000 or 7000, depending on how you're operating your business. And this cutter also as well is a 24-inch vinyl cutter, and it's about the industry standard when it comes to a vinyl cutter size. And it's the size I would recommend, because while there are smaller cutters out there, 15-inch ones, or even the craft cutters, they are a little bit limiting. As Mark mentioned previously, a lot of the heat transfer vinyls, they could be 20 inches wide, so if you get a 15-inch vinyl cutter, you're kind of limiting yourself to the types of products and materials that you can load in there. So this one here is a 24-inch, so it perfectly accommodates the 12, 15, 20-inch materials as well as the 24-inch signed vinyl products. And so operation, very similar with the cutting carriage, being able to move the X and Y coordinates to negotiate all those things, as well as the grit rollers here that feed the material back and forth. And, this one also has the cutting strip just like the GX24 does. And what that is that's just the area of the vinyl cutter where that blade will touch down. So it's not going to, and it's a little softer product, so it doesn't damage the blade all that much. So, and then from within there, you have your pinch rollers that are adjustable to accommodate different size lengths. And then here you have indicators here on where you could place those pinch rollers so that you're maximizing the width of your material, which when I load this in here next, or once I cover the features, I'll show how that kind of operates and allows you to maximize that width. And so much like the Roland, the GraphTech CE7000 does have an onboard control panel as well. And from here, you are able to adjust the downforce, which is basically the amount of force that you need to, the blade needs to exert on whatever product is that you're cutting. And where force is very important in no matter anything that you cut, because, each material, while vinyl material looks the same, there are different thicknesses, different textures of these products. So adjusting that force based on your products will be sure that you get an accurate and clean cut. And it's a common misconception when folks are cutting their vinyl, they may need to think they need to twist their blade and have it exposed further, when that's not the case. You always adjust your force accordingly, not your blade depth, because in these blade holders on both of these machines, that's where the blade sits. And then where it sits, it's like a little bearing, and then allows that blade to spin freely within that cutting mechanism there, so that it negotiates corners and sharp curves and things like that properly. So it's always spinning, so that the knife edge is always cutting the vinyl product. And when you put your blade out too far, rather than that blade spinning and negotiating those turns and corners and things, it kind of tends to rock back and forth, which would lead you to get to like perforated cuts, or, in a sharp curve, the corners remain intact, which makes it difficult to weed. So when adjusting things based off the vinyl, you always want to use the forced, not the blade depth, because blade depth, it's always going to be about the half a thickness to no more than the thickness of a credit card. So you barely see that blade holders or tip of that blade sticking out of the blade holder. And so some other features here that you could adjust is obviously the position of the carriage here by using the up-down arrows and things like that. Setting origin points so that you could start and stop the cutting process wherever you want to. And that comes into play if you have scrap materials, and maybe you already have something cut and you want to cut something else on the last remaining edge that you have. You could reposition that cutter, set a different origin point, so you could have that cutter start at a specific area that you want here from the machine. And in addition to those basic features there, the CE7000 also has up to 8 pre-programmable settings. And this could be a big time saver for you if you're cutting the same materials routinely. So if you're using a basic heat transfer vinyl and then switching to a glitter flake or a reflective or even a sign vinyl, you could pre-program the downforce settings into here, so that when you swap those materials out, you could quickly and easily automatically adjust those cutter settings here from the presets. And you could load up to 8 different presettings here with the I keep saying 6000 because that was the predecessor for the GraphTech for the CE7000, which we are looking at today. And so those are some of the basic features in here as far as the cutter level. And for software, as Mark mentioned, the Roland does come with the Cut Studio software, which is the native platform for Roland. And GraphTech also has its own native software as well. It comes with cutting drivers for both Corel as well as Illustrator. For those of you using those two artwork programs, you can continue to use those two seamlessly for a transition to send to cut, because the cutting drivers and plugins will allow you to take your artwork creations from those two software programs directly to the cutter for cutting. And in addition, the GraphTech is compatible with the CAD Works Live software that Mark showed you. So we've got you covered on all bases. And then the native software, it's called GraphTech Studio Pro. And now this is a little step above some of the Roland software, because it has a lot more functionality into as far as some design features, and you can create artwork within there. But it does require an additional payment for a software license through GraphTech in order to use GraphTech Pro Studio. All right, and so what we're going to do next is I'm going to use Corel Draw today and just highlight the Cutting Master plugin, which is going to look very similar to Vector Cut. There's not going to be any design functionality to the plugin, but what it is going to allow you to do is lay out your job and your sheet size so that you're able to gang different images and maximize that area and increase your production efficiencies. So for those of you who were in part 1 about the craft cutters, you are only able to cut a limited sheet size, so 12 by 15, 10 by 12, whatever that size is. So you have a lot of downtime when you have to reload those sheets. And as Mark had mentioned, this is a roll-fed cutter system that it allows you for continuous cutting. So no matter if you're doing 3 or 4 jobs at one time and you're using the same products or same materials where you don't have to change it out, it's going to allow you to quickly and easily cut multiple jobs at the same time from the same roll. And one other thing I forgot to mention too is we do have this on a tabletop as well. So these cutters do work very nicely on tabletops, but the GraphTech in addition does come with a stand, which is included when you do purchase this product. And so I'm going to be cutting some heat transfer vinyl again today. And so what we're going to do is we're going to load this. And I just have about a 1 yard sheet here that I'm going to load in. And if you do something like that where you're using a 1 yard piece, you're able to load that in from the front or the back of the cutter, whichever you want to. And now if you are using the roll tray, you're going to, that will sit behind the cutter with the roll. And with the stand, there is a roll holder for the stand that you place that roll on and feed it through from the back. Okay. And so unloading this material, like you saw with the Roland, we do have these guide marks here, which then allows you to make sure that you're loading your product in straight. And now the tracking of the heat transfer vinyl when using vinyl cutters, it really comes into play if you're cutting longer type jobs. So if you had a bunch of names that were 5 yards of material, you want to make sure that you have that loaded in there straight so that it does track true and doesn't come off track. And another key importance of tracking, if you're doing like pinstriping or racing stripes on vehicle graphics and stuff like that, it's really, really important that you load that material in straight. So when you do cut a long distance, it's going to remain straight. And so here we're able to position that wherever we want. And I know it's tough to see on my screen, but we have these little dots here. And a longer strip here. And what that indicates is where you want to place the edges of your material so that you're maximizing that width and not wasting any of your product here. So I'm going to move my carriage out of the way. And then here we have a longer piece, which is where on the GraphTech, if you're looking at it, the right side of the material, you want to be at the edge. So you're not, wasting any amount of material here. And so I'm using this guide here to make sure I'm straight all the way to the end. And then here we have this other pinch roller for the left side that's going to need to fall under that blue area as well, right under there. And so that way you can maximize that width so you're not wasting that material. And then so once you have that loaded in here, we're going to use the little pinch roller release right there. So we're going to lock that down. So now that material is in there. And so once you load that material, it engages the GX24. And then what I'm going to do here is select the front edge, and it's going to measure the width of the material from pinch roller to pinch roller, giving us the cutting space that we're going to be able to utilize from our material and feed it out to the very beginning so we're not wasting any bit, if you leave it sitting out in the front here. And so now we have our cutter set up to do some vinyl cutting. Now I'm going to head over to my software. And actually what I'm going to be showing you today is utilizing Corel Draw and the Cutting Master 4 plugin. So those of you Corel users out there, perfectly compatible with, I believe, all the way back to Corel 12, if I'm not mistaken, to the latest version. So same thing. I don't know the exact version of Illustrator, but it's also perfectly compatible with Illustrator. And so what we're going to use is we're going to use Corel for the designing, and you do the same thing with Illustrator. And then the Cutting Master 4 plugin, you're going to be able to install within your Corel product or your Illustrator product. And that plugin does come with the software included in the purchase price, which you would install for whichever version that you have. And so what that's going to allow us to do is here we have our Cutting Master 4 plugin right here. So what that does is that sends whatever you have designed in Corel to the cutting driver so that you're going to be able to lay that out. Because sometimes what folks will do is they'll set up their cutter as a printer and they'll send it to print like a normal Word document or something like that. And while, that does work, for the most part, but sometimes it loses a little bit of the information and cuts things a little wonky or not the proper way you do it. So I'd always recommend using the native cutting drivers or our CAD Works drivers, because we've kind of developed those to be sure that everything that you see on your screen cuts the way that it's supposed to by using those cutting drivers. And so here in Corel, I'm not going to get into a full-blown design, but I have my artwork imported in here. And as you can see, this is a vector art. And no matter with any cutter that you have, you always have to have vector art in order to send to vinyl cutting machines. Just think of it as kind of like, since vector art is a line art, just think of it as like a railroad track that cutter needs to follow in order to cut everything out. Okay, and so we have our graphic here in whatever size and whatever you design. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to send it to the Cutting Master plugin, and this is what's going to send to the cutter itself. So here I'm going to launch, and I'm going to do the cut plot to Cutting Master 4. And then what it's going to do is once it sends it over, it's going to open that out. And then what we're going to be able to do is then lay out our job as far as creating multiple copies and things like that to send to cutting. So while that's going along, Stacy, do we have any questions?
Yes, we actually do have a lot of good questions coming in. I want to make sure we do our best to make sure all of them get answered. I'm scrolling back earlier. We did have a question from earlier. Hold on one second. So I have a question from John. He actually emailed me before this webinar, so I just want to make sure this one gets taken care of first. He has the GraphTech CE Lite 50, and he wants to know if you guys have any tips on how to get the registration mark features to work properly so that he can nest his designs.
I've never used the CE Lite. I'm not familiar with that vinyl cutter. So we could do some research on that and see how to best maximize the print and cut capabilities. That these cutter, well, not so much printing, but the contour cutting pre-printed images utilizing both of these cutters. Mark, do you have an answer to that?
I don't. No, okay. That cutter is older than I can recall. We've been through several versions since it, for sure. That isn't to say that we don't have somebody on our tech team. I think it's fair to mention that we do employ a full tech team. People that purchase cutters from us get that support. And I think, John, you could probably access and maybe get an answer through them. Although I think you almost asked two questions. Nesting to me is getting your letters, numbers, and what have you as tightly snugged up together as possible in a design so that you have less waste in material. But registration to me is the markings on the page so that the cutter can find designs that are already on there. So if it's a nesting question, I think we can help. And frankly, if it's a registration dot and you have an optical eye question, I think we can help there as well, perhaps through our tech team.
He did say that the GraphTech CE Lite 50 does use the same software as the 6000. So I don't know if that would help you at all with the software.
I think here in the cutting plot section, if you did have pre-printed designs, you could set up the registration marks either from the cutting driver or there's an additional plugin within Corel. Let me go, if mine will go back. I'm not able to switch back to Corel for some reason. Yeah, I can't. For some reason, I can't switch back to Corel through my or any other program right now. So I'm not sure what's going on right now.
Hey, Stacy, encourage him to send you, or actually, you already do have his email. You can get the answer internally.
Okay.
You'll be able to escalate it up through to grab.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I was trying to help him, but I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So I thought I would ask. But sounds good. I will move on to some other questions. Dave wants to know, he just bought a Roland GS24 from Stahls a while back. When he loads the vinyl and lines it up to cut or test cut, its starting point is about 2 inches from the front edge of the material. Is there any way to get the front edge closer to the blade so you don't waste several inches of material every time you start cutting?
So after your test cut, you can push the carriage around with the left and right and up and down arrows and hit set origin and start all over again. If you do a test cut in the far, looking at the machine on the far left-hand side, if you do your test cut in the small area, you're happy with your test cut, you can simply move the carriage slightly to the right, hit origin, and then start your cut from there over. You don't have to waste an entire 2-inch or what have you strip at the bottom of it. I mean, that's one way. If you're cutting let's just stick with names. If you're cutting a name that's 8 inches long and you do a test cut here, you would start the name right there. I don't know how well people are seeing me, but just to the right of where you did the test cut is where you could start your real cut.
Yeah, I found, in history of using the vinyl cutter, especially the Roland, it's always great to get into the habit of using that origin set feature. So pulling your material all the way back at the cutter level so that it's not wasting any bit in front of it, moving it all the way over to the left, and then pressing and holding that origin button until it blinks origin set. So now you know that when you send that cutter job, it's going to start at that point wherever you set that origin. So it's always a good practice when it comes to Roland and even the GraphTech for that matter, to just do that kind of as a habit so that you aren't wasting that little bit of material. Because basically when that cutter registers that width of material, if you loaded it out with the material down to here, it's going to start cutting right here because it set its own origin. So when you reposition that product, always get in the habit of setting that origin again so that doesn't happen.
Perfect. Thank you. A few more questions before we continue on, and then I can read more at the end of the presentation. But this was to clarify something from earlier. Dave wanted to know, did you say that you can cut directly from CAD Works Live to a Silhouette Cameo rather than exporting the file as an SVG or PDF and importing into the Silhouette Studio and cutting with that? If so, please demonstrate how.
Mike, do you know that for certainty, whether or not it goes directly to the Silhouette from
Vector Cut? You can send to the Silhouette machines. I don't have one here to show you that,
right.
But it definitely can cut direct from Vector Cut.
And Stacy, do you know if that would happen to have been shown on part 1? Did we use CAD Works Live to a Silhouette?
Yes, so Jenna and Kelly did use CAD Works Live, so I'd have to recap with them. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they did show CAD Works Live in their presentation.
Okay.
And then James wants to know, do either of these vinyl cutters allow a feature to save settings for future jobs?
The GraphTech, you are able to have preset settings based on materials and things that you have loaded into the system.
And the Roland, you do not.
Right.
Okay, so that's a good difference to notate. We have a question about the Roland GS24. What is the smallest piece of scrap material you can use to cut artwork?
I think it's somewhere in the range of about 4 inches wide and I believe about 6 inches deep. Now, I don't recommend it, but some people trick the machine by putting something over the optical eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's worth it, to be perfectly honest with you, unless you are just down to your very last piece and you've got to get something done. But you can cover the optical eye, giving the machine the impression that there is material loaded over the top of it. There is a setting for piece, and the width between the two closest pinch rollers is your width. Okay, so I can have a pinch roller here, pinch roller here, and then I have an optical eye here and one equally in the back. So if that's 4 to 5 inches and that's 6 inches, you better make sure your piece is at least that large. Now that doesn't mean your design's going to be exactly that large. You're going to be within the confines of that piece by a little bit. So save your scraps. And in a pinch, in an emergency, like I said, you might be able to trick the machine a little bit. Just, I don't recommend it.
Okay.
Or I can't recommend it.
Right.
I haven't done it, but I can't recommend it.
Yeah.
Is there any recommended file format for cut files if somebody is using Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, SVG, JPEG, PNG, EPS? Is there anything specifically that you guys would recommend?
That's what's ideal about when you're using Corel or whether you're using Illustrator, utilizing the plugins that come with both computers that are able to install directly within Corel or Illustrator. Because essentially what that does is it takes your file, whatever you created within Illustrator or Corel, it renegotiates all that information and converts it and sends it directly to the cutting software in a file format that it understands. But typically EPS, PLT files, SVG, those primarily work with most cutting softwares, That's why they've developed these plugins to basically take all that guesswork out of it, using Corel, using Illustrator the way you're used to, and then just simply using that plugin so that it sends all that correct information over so that you cut successfully.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for clearing that up. I'll let you guys continue on, and then we can wrap up some more Q&A at the end.
All right. So here we are. We are in the Cutting Master 4 plugin. So we had our graphic that we had created in Corel. So it looks exactly what we need to look like. And so much like the Roll and Cut Studio software, this does communicate back and forth from the cutter. By clicking this button, it's going to pull the cutter itself, and then it's going to be able to then tell us that we have 13.74 inches of material to cut. So keep that in mind, and that's with most roll-fed cutters out there, that while we are cutting on a 15-inch piece of material, the pinch roller is going to lose a little bit of material on each side. So, when it comes to 15-inch material, you'll probably have about 13 and a half, 14 inches of actual cuttable space. So keep that in mind when you're making your settings. And that's why it's important to adjust those pinch rollers and position it properly on the cutter so you're not losing out on the width. And in addition to the question before, not anything in the front by making sure you set your origin. And so from here, you are able to add multiple copies, so you could fill out the width of the sheet, do some spacing and things like that. But you're also able to rotate your designs. Since we are cutting heat transfer vinyl, we do need to rotate it and cut it backwards. But if this were for a sticker material, you want to make sure that you're cutting it as you would normally read it, and things like that. And so once you have your job laid out, now we could send this to the vinyl cutter. And then here we could go ahead and send. And then now I'm going to stop sharing here. Stop share. And now we have our vinyl machine doing all the cutting for us. So what it's going to do, it's going to cut out what we had laid out in our software. And then just like, Mark did, so while I'm cutting, Mark, if you wanted to highlight, your finished design, and ours will be the exact same way, where we're going to, once it's done cutting, take it to your weeding panel, weed everything out, and then you're ready for heat press. So I'll turn it over to Mark to show what he has cut and weeded already.
Okay, Mike, thanks. Thank you very much. I started weeding this and I said, well, wait, I'm going to stop and try to toss out some pointers to the folks that are here that are, maybe stepping up their business to this level of cutter. They've got one, maybe they struggle with some things around the cutter. I'm just going to point out that when you're weeding, do yourself a favor and weed towards the cavities of the letters. So pulling into the G's, pulling into the prongs of an E or an F, you'll get better and smoother weeding. So that's just a little tip after thousands of weeding sessions of my own in the sporting goods business, watching people do it. Also, the tools of the trade. Make sure you've got yourself at least a good cutting blade, so you're cutting materials off. Scissors will do it, but they'll skip out of there and damage up your machine. And I'm sure people can run scissors through there, but do it with a blade. And then the weeding tool, essential equipment. Not just for getting in and finding the beginning of your weeding, but also when you're doing the centers, you can just grab them and get them pulled out. You can even start stacking them up on this. You don't have to take each and every cavity and remove it. You can just keep going with it, and they'll start to stack up on there until you get half a dozen or so, and then you scoot them off and continue on. So while most people despise weeding, there are a few little tricks to make life a little easier in that area. I loaded a piece of sign vinyl in my cutter because I wanted to show tracking. Mike made a mention of it. I think this is very important to differentiate between the cutters that were shown in the prior webinar and these more light industrial cutters. So if there's a design that I need to cut a long piece of, that's where these come in. They're roll fed. They track wonderfully well. They're fast as far as checking the tracking. Okay, so this is going to spit out footage, if not yardage, if I just held this down and continue to go. And never did it vary off of that space where Roland provides you with those guidelines. So we know it's tracking very straight there, and I don't risk it ever coming off one of the pinch rollers, even if I'm cutting a 10-foot sign. So that's tracking, and that's the beauty of these roll-fed cutters versus the cartridge or the tray type cutters. These are truly light industrial cutters. They'll do what we say they will do. I can tell you after selling hundreds of them, I can only come up with one instance of buyer's remorse, and that was because the machine didn't cut a material that that customer specifically wanted, and because they very quickly got into rhinestones. So the cutters never came out for the most part. But hundreds of these sold. Can't come up with a solid instance of a dissatisfied customer. The return on investment on these can be managed and achieved just with names alone. Names and personalization, I don't care. Personalization can be departmentalization. If you're doing city work and you need to put public works, administration, security, those are names, and there's no better way to do them than with a cutter. There just simply isn't. You've got a piece of heat transfer vinyl here that's about $1 investment, 10 by 10, let's say, a penny a square inch. I didn't even really jam these together, and I've got about 6 or 7 names on here. I meant specifically to show that I could fit 3 short names across a line. So in that 20 or so cents worth of material, I've got 3 names. Typically in this industry, those are $3 to $5, $6 or more dollars a piece when it comes time to heat apply those and sell them to your customers. So return on investment on these is quick. I know that in the 90s, I paid for my cutter in one summer of doing all-star baseball names. 400 names, done. I ran that cutter for the following 15 years and loved every second of it. Couldn't have gone a day without it, quite frankly. What else did I want to cover that came out of Mike? Tracking, did it. Tools of the trade, did it. A brief discussion about materials and advancing, your outlook on things and what you're decorating now. Keep in mind that at Stahls, we provide color swatches of all of our materials. So if you need these in your office or hanging around your desk as an example to show your customers, these are available free on our website. Go to swatches, click the ones that you want. I also want to mention some things that you may or may not be cutting or considering cutting now. If you are running one of the smaller cutters, if you're planning to upgrade to this, don't forget metallics, right? We've got a great line of metallic products. Don't forget all the colors that our products come in. Most of our core product, like our brand new Ultra Weed, our Premium Plus, 40 or more colors, generally even over 50 or 60 colors available. Glitter flake. The blades on these cutters are gonna handle glitter flake. The forces on these cutters are gonna handle glitter flake. And if you want to do the overcut and go through your glitter flake cuts twice, you can just set your cutter to do that. You'll penetrate through the glitter flake. You'll get much better weeding if you do so, even though they'll cut fine just through one. Don't forget reflectives. This is a big part of the business. When I look at my customer list and I see where the big boys are positioned, there are a lot of them in the safety decorating realm. Reflectives can be a key, and obviously these cutters will cut reflectives all day long. We've now offered to print our glitter flake. This is kind of a Christmas time candy cane stripe that you can cut, weed, mask, and apply, so that each one of your letters or each one of your little Christmas designs will have that pattern filled throughout it. And this is our heat transfer vinyl. Again, for the seasons, I chose a heat transfer vinyl that's been printed all over it. And one thing to keep in mind about these patterns is that you get to pick the colors. If you wanted to insert some gold in here and play with it on our designer, you're free to do so. You can completely personalize and make this one your own. Any of these that are part of the patterns program, you pick the colors. We print the length, send it to you, and you cut it in your cutter. Hopefully one just like this. Mike, got anything? I see we're up against 3:59. I know there's a couple of questions waiting in the queue. I would like to sort of wrap up my portion by saying, again, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. It's very common for people to move into these cutters, get the business rolling in the right direction, see an increase, utilize Stahls services when the production is more than you may want to do on this cutter. but very often these lead to the natural progression into a printer. There is no printer head on these. Part 3 of this series will be on the printer cutters, which necessarily means there's a print head along with a cutter, allowing you to print full color onto your heat transfer vinyls, your signed vinyls, and other things. So do make a point to pay attention and maybe sign up for the Part 3 printer cutter, third part of this series.
So one thing I'd like to add, Mark, too, you hit the nail right on the head, is we have many of our customers, the first thing that they do is they get into this business with a heat press, and they're utilizing Stahls for their pre-cut letters, pre-cut numbers, or their custom CAD cutting services. What's nice is here is a lot of folks, when they do that, they get into the vinyl cutting and they're starting to do things themselves. So what's nice is when you purchase the rolled goods, whether it's thermofilm, whether it's glitter flake, ultra weed, the same things that you're going to be cutting in-house now that you have cutting capabilities are going to match the same exact products that you would order from us via services. So if you're using a lot of pre-cut thermofilm numbers, you bang out a team jersey, for whatever, and then tomorrow you used all your numbers. You have a roll of thermofilm in stock, you're able to bang out those few extra kids that might have got added to the team, right on your vinyl cutter with thermofilm, and it's going to match exactly. So you're not going to have to worry about color matching anything. The same products that we utilize in our services, you're going to be cutting the same exact things here. So everything is going to match.
Well said. Stacy, we can jump back into some questions if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of a good closing question. We have some customers who are having a hard time deciding between the two models, GraphTech and Roland, because they see that there are a lot of similarities. Someone told me that a Stahls tech told them that Roland was a lot more user-friendly, but didn't really provide a great deal on how they're different. They see the price point is similar. They want a machine that will grow with their business, so they're hesitant to select a certain cutter. What advice could you give to somebody who wants to make that choice between which cutter they should get?
I'll take that one. Mike, you can finish it up. I'm only taking it because I'm the older of the two of us, as you can probably tell by the gray hair. As I said, I had a Roland in the 1990s, and Roland just, impressed me from that point on. I've stayed a Roland fan for some of the simplicity. I like that the controls are on the machine. I'm comfortable with it. If you line up the pros and the cons, there's a lot of similarities between the two. They will do what they're supposed to do. They will do it for a very long time with zero maintenance. You have consumables on both machines. Those are going to be the same. The speeds are going to be roughly the same. The forces are roughly the same. The tracking accuracies are mostly the same. The warranty period is roughly the same. The purchase price is roughly the same. We already know that the software is where some of the differences are. The generation that I come from, I don't know, we kind of like to keep it simple. And we typically were Corel users and Roland cutters. There's a whole wonderful generation coming up through the ranks right now that are more savvy. They're more computer oriented. They like their controls on their computer screen. They like their connectivities to be different. You do have a slight advantage with the GraphTech as far as utilizing the Mac computers. Roland can do it. There's just some extra accessories and things to do, downloads and what have you. So I think I will say that the Corel users are the Roland purchasers. They just kind of, it's part of a generational thing. I can't find, I can't criticize or critique either machine to say, don't do it. And with that, I think Mike can tell you why his generation tends to like the GraphTech.
Yeah, it's exactly what Mark said. I first came into the industry, I learned the Roland, so that's what I was always most comfortable with. So when the GraphTech came out, at least when Stahls started carrying it, it was a little bit more of a learning curve for me because I was a little bit so familiar with Corel and everything else. But Mark is definitely right. It seems like the newer generation, and what kids are being taught in graphic design school, it's mainly Illustrator. Heck, half the time people, when you say Corel to, an Illustrator, like, what the heck is that? But yeah, I think Illustrator users and most certainly Mac users tend to gravitate towards the GraphTech more because it's just an easier transition for them. But at the end of the day, you're not going to make a bad decision one way or another. It's just like, I always say, it's like Ford versus Chevy, whichever one is going to suit you best for your needs, because both of them, they're going to be able to do great jobs on any type of heat transfer work, whether it's basic names and numbers, specialized finishes, reflective glitter, stuff like that. But because I think most of the younger generation, like Mark said, is going to go towards the GraphTech, where, I'm getting up into the older age myself, where, I'd probably go with the Roland just because of that, because what I learned on. But just keep in mind, you're not making a bad decision either choice, because they're both going to serve your business super well.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that explanation. I have a few more questions about the GraphTech, and then we should be good to wrap up. Dave wanted to know, is there a weeding function on the CE7000?
If you're referring to like the weed box, yes, you can put your weed box around your graphics within the CE7000 as well.
Yep, perfect. I think that's what he was referring to. And then we have another question. How often do you have to change the cutting strips on the GraphTech CE7000?
When it comes to the cutting strip on whether it's the GraphTech or the Roland, you shouldn't have to change those maybe but once a year. And if you're using the proper settings, remember what I said earlier when it comes to doing your downforce and blade depth and things like that. Do your test cuts on the material so that you're ensuring that you're just cutting through the vinyl itself and just slightly scoring that carrier sheet that is mounted on. Because really, you're not going to damage your cutting strip unless you're cutting with excessive downforce and cutting through. And once you start cutting through vinyl, whether it's signed vinyl or heat transfer vinyl, you're going to start gouging that cutting strip. And so what happens over time is those gouges, and when it cuts over that area, that material is kind of going to buckle into that little groove. And then it's going to cause for miscuts and skip cuts and things like that. And that's across both machines. So, and I don't think I mentioned it, my apologies on that. You can test your downforce here in your cutter, do test cuts so that you know that you're cutting at the proper depth and the proper force so that you're not damaging that cutting strip. But eventually over time, there is going to be some wear and tear because the blade is still hitting that cutting strip. So like I said, if you have to change it more than once in the year, you need to make sure that, you're dialing in your force when you're cutting your product so that you're not overly damaging that. But once a year, and heck, even maybe not even that much, but once you start to see some noticeable grooves in that strip, and they're visual, once you start to see some deep grooves or something like that, or nicks, just change it out. They're relatively inexpensive when it comes to changing that particular consumable part out on the cutter.
Does our CAD Works Live software work with the GCC JAG 5, I believe?
Yeah.
It does.
Yep, CAD Works works with all GCC cutters, Roland cutters, GraphTech, and the Silhouette Cameo. And there are a number of other ones because you could just use kind of like a generic HPGL language, which most cutters are going to be able to recognize from CAD Works.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I think we are wrapping up on questions. I just also wanted to quickly mention that a lot of links will be sent out in the email that everyone will receive later today. So good resources to check and look over. We have comparison charts, good resources, videos, all that good stuff. So I'm good on my end if you guys just wanted to wrap up, and we should be all set.
Sure. I'll wrap up by saying this. Give yourself a cutter for Christmas. You'll be more than happy by Easter. It's a game changer. It takes you into an area where, it just takes the business up and up. And hey, for that matter, when a cutter's in place, take a look at Stahls Spirit Sale. The cutter's how you can decorate so much of the apparel that can be posted in your stores. Stahls Spirit Sale is a store design platform. And when you can pop up shirts in an hour or two and start selling, that's when a cutter and then in the future, a printer will really pay the dividends. So everybody enjoy the rest of December, put a cutter on your Christmas list and make 2021 the best it can be. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.